It was around 9 p.m. when I decided to leave the house and go for a walk after a long day of doing tasks. Although I was passing through areas that locals said were haunted, I didn't mind. The streets were still busy. All I had in mind was to walk to clear my mind, and it would be good exercise, since walking is great for health. Without realizing it, I had walked almost 2 kilometers when I decided to stop at a small roadside coffee shop. The night air felt cool, and the wind gently blew, carrying the distinct scent of earth. The streetlights shone brightly, casting long shadows on the asphalt. The coffee shop I entered looked simple, with just a few wooden tables and chairs under a small tent. Some customers were busy chatting, sipping on warm coffee, with cigarette smoke curling from their hands. I ordered a cup of black coffee. The sound of the spoon clinking against the glass accompanied the silence of my thoughts. The warmth touched my lips, the bitterness soothing, like a faithful companion on this quiet night. Between sips, I gazed at the streets, which were slowly becoming quieter, as if the world was slowing down and giving me space to breathe for a moment, away from the routine. However, amidst the silence, something caught my attention. At the end of the street, where the streetlights no longer reached, I saw a vague figure standing still. Its body looked thin, too thin for a regular human. It just stood there, unmoving, staring at the coffee shop with its head slightly tilted. At first I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was just someone passing by, I thought. But the longer I stared, the stranger it felt. The figure wasn't moving at all, like a statue misplaced in the wrong spot, and for some reason I felt its gaze directly on me, even though it was far away. I turned my gaze away, trying to enjoy my coffee again. But suddenly, the air changed. The wind, which was once cool, turned sharply cold, bringing with it a strange scent, like rotten meat mixed with wet soil. The other customers in the shop seemed unaffected, too busy with their own conversations to notice. When I dared to look at the figure again, it was no longer in its original spot. The street ahead was empty, only the shadow of trees swaying gently in the wind. But the unease remained. Then, from the opposite direction, I heard the sound of slow footsteps. The echo was heavy and slow, like someone dragging their feet on the asphalt. I turned around, and my blood froze. The figure was now on the other side of the street, closer. I could see it more clearly in the dim streetlight. Its face, or what was left of it, wasn't human. Its skin was pale, almost transparent, with empty eyes, nothing but deep blackness where the eyeballs should have been. It was still staring at me, and now I was certain that its smile, too wide, was not a friendly one. As I tried to stand up and leave, the sound of footsteps stopped. When I looked again, the figure was now in the middle of the road, just a few meters from the coffee shop. Not long after, it disappeared. Time seemed to pass unnoticed. I glanced at my phone screen. 0:03. Feeling a bit relieved, I exhaled and prepared to leave the now empty coffee shop. The night air had turned colder, and the distant sound of nocturnal animals could be heard faintly. I walked slowly along the narrow, dark road. The street lights didn't help much, only occasionally casting shadows of trees around. The night air was making my hair stand on end, whether from the cold or from a strange feeling that had suddenly arisen. As I passed a quiet intersection, I heard it again, the footsteps, rhythmic, following me from behind. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I turned around, but there was no one there. Just the long shadow of myself, reflected by the dim streetlight. "Just a suggestion," I muttered, trying to calm myself. I quickened my pace, trying to ignore the strange sounds around me, but the further I went, the closer the footsteps seemed to get. This time, they were heavier, like someone dragging something. Daringly, I looked back once more. The figure that had disappeared was back, standing at the end of the road, but something was different. Its body seemed more bent, and its face was hidden by long, tangled hair. I couldn't see its eyes, but I knew it was staring directly at me. "Ooh, who the fuck are you?" My voice trembled. There was no answer. Suddenly, it moved. Not walking, but sliding toward me with an unnatural speed. I didn't think anymore. I ran as fast as I could, not caring which direction. But the road seemed to stretch on forever. The shadows of trees on the sides of the street grew darker and more suffocating. Oh, my breath became labored, but the dragging footsteps, those heavy, dragging footsteps, still followed, getting closer and closer. Eventually, the road ahead suddenly ended. I stood frozen, trying to find a way to escape. That's when the heavy footsteps stopped. Slowly, I turned around. The figure was right behind me, its shattered face smiling, and a hoarse voice came from its mouth. "It's late. Why are you still here?" My body froze. My heart raced so loud I thought I could hear it echo in my ears. The figure was now closer, and a rancid smell filled my nose, like wet earth mixed with frozen blood. Go, I whispered, almost inaudibly, even though I knew it was pointless. The figure just stood there, unmoving, but its smile slowly widened, revealing sharp black teeth. I stepped back, only to feel the coldness of the dead-end wall behind me. No way out. Cold sweat trickled down my temples. My own shadow now seemed to writhe beneath its feet, as though it were alive. "Are you scared?" Its voice was raspy, like a sound from the depths of a dark well. "I just want to play, like before." "Before?" I asked, confused and terrified. What did it mean? I didn't know it, but before I could finish my thought, I felt my body being pulled. Its legs, or whatever they were, stuck to the ground like tree roots, tightening around me, holding me in place. The shadow beneath it began to move, stretching and twisting, climbing up the walls around us. From that shadow, other faces began to emerge, faces that were shattered, with empty eyes and lips stretched into similar mocking smiles. I screamed, trying to break free, but the shadow's grip tightened. My body could no longer move. The figure was now only inches from my face. Its black, empty eyes absorbed all the light around them. "Do you remember that night here? You left me alone." My mind spun, trying to figure out what it meant. That night, suddenly, a vague memory flashed in my mind. A small child, standing in the middle of the road, staring at me while I was rushing on my motorcycle. The rain was pouring down and I didn't stop. I just drove past, ignoring it. No, this couldn't be happening. I didn't mean to. I tried to defend myself. My voice was more like a whimper. I didn't even know who you are. It smiled wider, and the dragging footsteps sounded again, this time from every direction. The faces surrounding me laughed, mocking me. The figure drew closer, so close that I could feel its cold breath on my skin. "You don't need to know," it whispered. "You just need to remember. This night is for paying. Before I could react, everything went dark. There was only the sound of screaming, not from me, but from somewhere deep and distant. Moments later, I felt myself falling endlessly into an empty void. Just when I thought everything was over, a voice from afar suddenly pulled me out of the suffocating fear. The voices of people shouting my name, getting closer and closer. I opened my eyes and saw some villagers running toward me, holding flashlights. The figure, the creature that made my skin crawl, was still standing in front of me. But when the flashlight beam touched its body, it hissed loudly, as if burned by the light. The figure looked at me one last time, its face full of anger. "This isn't over," it hissed, before disappearing in an instant, merging with the surrounding darkness. The foul smell vanished, leaving only the cold air that froze me. The villagers who had reached me looked confused. One of them, Mr. James, patted my shoulder. "What's wrong, kid? Why are you standing here alone? You look so pale," he asked, concerned. I gasped for breath, still trying to understand what had just happened. With a trembling voice, I told them what I had seen. The figure, the dragging footsteps, the shadows that seemed alive. However, their reactions weren't what I expected. Mr. James frowned. "You must be exhausted. It's just your imagination. There's no way there are ghosts here," he said, chuckling, though his tone seemed a bit uncertain. Others nodded. Some even tried to reassure me that I was just hallucinating because of the quiet street and the late hour. If anything strange had happened, we'd have seen it before. "Nothing like that has ever happened here," said one of the villagers. I wanted to argue, to convince them that I wasn't imagining it. But I realized there was no proof. The street around me looked normal now, just as dark as any other night. There was no trace of the figure, no sound of dragging footsteps, no strange shadows. Everything had disappeared. Finally, they took me back to the coffee shop to calm down. While sipping the warm tea they made for me, my mind was still full of questions. What did the figure mean? What really happened that night? And why did I feel like it wasn't really over, like it said? As the villagers began to leave and I prepared to go home, I glanced at the dark road in the distance. Faintly, I thought I saw something, a shadow, moving quickly among the trees. Maybe it was just an illusion, or maybe it was still watching me.